Welcome to the Destination Rural podcast series. I'm Peter Rutherford. I'm the CEO of the Rural Doctors Association of Australia. And today I'm talking to Dr Shannon Nott. He's managed to combine a medical administration and a clinical workload in his role out in Western New South Wales. Thanks, Shannon, for joining me on our Destination Rural podcast series. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet on and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. As I said, thanks, Shannon, for joining me. I generally like to kick this off with a little bit of background of, who you are, where you grew up, and just, getting to know you a little bit better.
No worries. Well, my name's Shannon Nott, and I grew up originally on a sheep, cattle and cropping property near a town in central West New South Wales called Dunedoo. My dad was, or he is, a fifth generation farmer, and had our family been on that property pretty much since I suppose European settlers entered that area. So I grew up like most country kids, small country town, went to primary school, small country town. I had about 6 people in my classroom. And my mum was from the Philippines and came out to Australia, straight out to Dunedoo when she came out to Australia, and obviously met Dad, and they've had a family and still going on strong. I grew up, I think, like most country kids and loving the outdoors, loving outside, and I absolutely loved property and loved being on the farm. It was reflecting on my childhood, I think, one of those experiences that now that I'm a little bit older, it's something certainly that I want to emulate with my own children. That sense of being able to adventure, being outside, being with nature is something that I think you really take for granted until you go into metropolitan areas. And for me, having gone to university in Sydney and boarding school in Sydney, I really, as I got older, got to appreciate more and more that sense of openness and connection with country that I had as I grew up on the farm. And so that's something that I think I cherish a lot from my childhood, and I think to a degree it molded me a fair bit to today in terms of my own career choices and where I want to live and work and the type of life that I want to lead, particularly in rural communities. I think, obviously, I eventually got into medical school, but people always ask, "Oh, why is the son of a farmer and a guy that loved farming so much ended up being a doctor?" When that happened, but I think there's been a number of sort of life, I suppose, life experiences that led me to think about entering medicine. And one of those was when I was around 9 years old. I had a viral infection, and my parents, being non-medical and non-health, don't recall the diagnosis. But after being crook for about a week or so with a viral illness and fevers and so on and so forth, I woke up one day and was unable to use to see our country GP, and he was on things pretty straight away and got us transferred to Dubbo, and I spent the preceding week in Dubbo getting medication, and again, being quite young, I wasn't quite aware of what was going on and the seriousness of it, but obviously got the use of my legs back. But I think when I look back on life experiences, that one was my first major interaction with the health system, and I recall just the generosity of medical and nursing staff at it was Dubbo Hospital then, and I look fondly on that. So there's probably a couple of things sort of in my upbringing and childhood that led me to where I am today.
Can I ask, how did kids at boarding school and then at university respond when you told them you're from Dunedoo?
Most people think that it's the place, think it's Bonnie Doon from the castle, to be honest. People get that mixed up all of the time. But I think I was lucky. I went to a large boarding school, the King's School in Sydney, and there were a lot of country kids, and so a lot of people knew or had heard or been to or grew up around that area. And so I think that wasn't too different at Boyle, at least, but certainly at university. Going to the University of New South Wales, huge cohorts, predominantly metropolitan kids, predominantly kids from selective schools in the city. And who some of them hadn't even gone outside of sort of their suburban surrounds, let alone across the sandstone wall that is the Blue Mountains. And so it was completely foreign for a lot of people that there would be this kid that grew up on a property, it was 5,000 acres, out near a place called Dunedoo that was 6-ish hours from Sydney, would one get to university, let alone be sort of there, mixing it with people who had sort of set their sights on medicine from day one of school almost.
With going to boarding school, I mean, that's something that a lot of, rural parents, or particularly parents living in remote communities, a decision they have to face. How did you find it as a kid, but also is it something that you would consider for your own kids, or is that just something that's not on the radar?
Look, I love boarding school. I think I grew a lot while I was at boarding school in terms of identifying, obviously being someone that had gone there from year 7, a sort of 12-year-old, through to year 12, and then kicking on to university afterwards. You naturally during that period find out a lot about yourself. But I think for me, in reflecting on those years, I gained a lot of confidence. I learned a lot about the world and things outside of my community that I might not have been able to should I have stayed in my small country town, certainly. But also I think the other thing was that because it was a large boarding school and there was a good mix of boarders and day students, I think the dynamic of country kids in a metropolitan environment actually taught a lot of metro kids a fair bit about one way where country kids would learn a fair bit about the big wide world and getting opportunities that you would at boarding school. It was also an ability for us to show and share and teach people who hadn't been out to rural areas about what it is like to live and work there. For me, my kids are quite young, but I'd definitely be considering sending them to boarding school. I absolutely loved it. I think I gained a lot, particularly in that co-curricular activities. I think I gained a lot in terms of public service, learned a lot in terms of being able to push myself and do things like Duke of Edinburgh's award, and then travel overseas and just widen my horizons. And so I'd certainly want that for my kids, but I also recognise that boarding school's not for everyone. And so I think time will tell how my girls go as they get older, but certainly want to be able to provide them with opportunities that I've had in the past.
Nice. So tell me a little bit about the job that you currently have.
Yeah, so my job that I'm in at the moment, I'm living in Dubbo. I've been here for a bit over 5 years now, and I currently am the Rural Director of Medical Services for Western New South Wales Local Health District. And so that's a role that oversees medical coverage and medical services, and things like safety and quality across 35 smaller rural and remote hospitals and multi-purpose services across a footprint of about 280,000 square kilometres. So reaching from sort of just the edge of the sort of western edge of the Blue Mountains, as far north as the Queensland border, sort of north of Lightning Ridge and northwest of Lightning Ridge. So it's a huge area, significant diversity in regards to the communities, the need, the challenges that exist in terms of healthcare need and health workforce need. But I also maintain my clinical skill set. And so the majority of my clinical work at the moment is with the Royal Flying Doctors Service, where I do both primary care, so remote clinics, as well as doing retrieval medicine. I'm also a GP anaesthetist, and so I've been trying to keep my currency in anesthetics by predominantly doing some anaesthetic work, and sort of trying to get out to some of our coverage as required by.
Is the variety in rural something that you think makes rural medicine an attractive career option? Like, I mean, you're doing medical admin, you're also working for RFDS as well as your GP anaesthetics work. So do you think the opportunities to create that sort of role that fits your particular interest is something that most rural sites can offer, or do you think it's unique to you?
No, this is not unique to me at all. And I think it's one of the things when I speak to early career doctors sort of in their either late medical school, early sort of JMO years, looking at career options. Rural health is really and particularly rural generalism, is a choose your own adventure. There is capability for you to be able to shape yourself as a clinician or administrator or a combination of both, or even a medical leader if you're really interested in medical and rural health advocacy. You can really shape your career in multiple ways that allows you to keep your cup full. And I think that's something that's incredibly important. Is we talk about well-being and self-care, and I think as I've gotten older and sort of been able to reflect on my career, there've been points where I probably haven't looked after myself as well, or haven't probably more exactly haven't realized what are the things that really I enjoy about my work-life balance, and how do I keep my sort of Shannon happy cup full. And as I've sort of tried different things, I've realized that having this mix of sort of medical leadership, medical administration positions where I can look at rural healthcare challenges on a sort of system and sort of more global perspective, that's a really important thing for me. I've always really enjoyed looking at how can we influence policy or programs or set up the models of care that really make a difference to individuals and communities. But at the same time, I love my clinical medicine, and so by choosing rural generalism as a career, I've been able to have that nice mix of both. And I certainly am not alone in being able to create a career path or upskill or skill yourself to a point where you are able to take on those interest areas of which there are it's almost like an endless field where you can choose your own adventure and be able to be the clinician that meets the needs of not only yourself from a self-worth perspective, but also, more importantly, the community. And I think when you're able to work and support communities in a way that I think most of us have gotten into medicine, that's incredibly rewarding and something that rural medicine allows us to do.
You touched on like the system and things like that, and I know you've got sort of involved a little bit with the, I guess, rural medicine on that international face. I know, like, how important is that to sort of, build your networks, but not just locally, but even internationally, and what does that, I guess, bring to you in relation to your experience or, your interest in rural medicine as well as your medical admin role?
I think it's incredibly important as we become professionals and find our space in sort of this profession of medicine, to have people who are your people you're able to bounce ideas off, people that get the challenges that you have to go through, but are also able to be supportive. And I think I've been lucky in that I've from my student days being involved with organisations like the National Rural Health Students Network and AMSA, and then going to conferences like Rural Medicine Australia, Rural Health conferences. That, I think, naturally built a baseline network of people across certainly my local area, but also across the country, that allowed me to have people that help me, I suppose, deal with challenges that I'd face at whatever point through my career. As I've gotten older and been able to be involved with organisations like Rural Wonka, which is sort of the rural council for the World Congress of Family Physicians, you're able to start broadening your horizons. You're able to start understanding challenges on a global scale, but also you're building a network of not only colleagues and peers, but also a network of friends who are able to support you through whatever challenges you have moving forward. And I think that's a really healthy space. Sometimes people sort of point to in rural medicine that you can be professionally isolated, and I think the ability to find your people, that could be through conferences, it could be through organisations, it could be through advocacy, or simply it could be at the pub of people that allow you to wind down. I think that's really important. And for me, that network of peers who I can bounce ideas off, who I can get ideas from, and can help me at different stages through my career is incredibly important.
We touched on your kids a little earlier and talked about boarding school. What about your partner? How do they find Dubbo? Do they work? Is it, what's the situation with your partner, if you don't mind me asking?
That's fine. My wife, Kristen, is a pharmacist. She's a hospital-based pharmacist, and I've been incredibly lucky that she's been so supportive of my career. And like a lot of people in medicine, it does take us to different places. I've been overseas doing research in different parts of the country doing work, and now landed in Dubbo. And I've been incredibly lucky. She's been very supportive of the work that I've been doing and wanting to be involved with. But also I'm lucky in the fact that as a hospital pharmacist, she's been able to find work everywhere where we've been around the world. And so for her, I think I'm quite lucky that she enjoys, she grew up rurally and she enjoys rural communities, but also gets a sense of sort of that belonging and community that many of us do when we go into rural communities. And but also a sense of self-worth around the work that she's doing from a hospital pharmacy perspective. And so being able to jump into multiple roles, there's been so many opportunities for her as a health professional just by virtue of the fact that we are living rurally. So she's been involved with public health teams, large sort of EMR rollouts as sort of a subject matter expert clinician, looking at sort of implementing electronic prescribing in our region, and now working as a pharmacist, a hospital-based pharmacist, providing telehealth support into rural communities or rural hospitals where they don't have access to hospital pharmacists. So working very closely with rural generalists around ensuring medication safety, and then making also sure that patients are able to understand what medications they're on and why they're on and the importance of them.
Has the hospital administration, I guess, helped support both you and your partner to make sure that you are given those professional opportunities? I guess, obviously it's generally easy for a doctor to walk into any town and say, I want a job. But have you found that the hospital administration have been, equally supportive to make sure that, your wife's given, those professional opportunities, not, jobs for the boys type thing, although it's your wife, but that those opportunities are supported?
Yeah, I definitely. So when I originally took a role here in Dubbo, I wasn't looking for a job in Dubbo, and to come back from doing a Churchill Fellowship overseas and spoken at a couple of conferences on sort of utilisation of sort of new models of care in remote communities, and particularly models that involve technology. And this district was or area was really keen for me to come back and support some programs that I was wanting to lead. And so I wasn't looking for a job in Dubbo, but I think there was a good mix of I think some system-wide stuff that I wasn't director of medical services at the time, but some system-wide projects that I could be involved with, and then also a good opportunity for me to do some training in the region and progress further as a rural generalist. And when I originally got approached to come to the area, I did say, look, I've got to consider my wife, and she's a hospital pharmacist, and are there opportunities in the hospital pharmacy space? And they did get her in contact with some of our directors of pharmacy, and certainly they were able to point to her that there were job opportunities coming up, and that allowed us to be a little bit more comfortable in moving to an area that we hadn't probably considered up until the point I was approached.
So just again, sort of going outside, and we try and create a bit of a picture about what is rural life like. So what do you do outside of work to relax, to wind down? What sort of activities can your kids get involved with and things like that?
So I as I said, I really enjoy working and being outside. I've got a little acreage just about 15 minutes out of Dubbo, and so in my downtime, I quite like going outside and doing things that I sort of grew up doing, sort of fixing fences and pottering around the house and building bits and pieces, which is great. I also have horses. I love horse riding, and so we're able to have horses here. And so at the moment I've got quite a young Arab mare that I'm training up to be an endurance horse, and hoping to be able to compete with her next year at some endurance races around the country. And so that's certainly something that keeps me busy. And then the other thing for me is just sort of camping and getting outside. I ride motorbikes as well, and so being able to go out and ride my motorbike. And I think the great thing about where we live and living rurally is that you do have that sort of almost untapped access to capability to go camping and forward driving and explore nature, and they're the things that I love doing, and so get to be involved with all of that. For our kids, so my kids are little, but they go to dance class and I go to swimming lessons, and in the next year or two we'll probably start joining some sport clubs and going and being involved with pony club, and all that. Essentially we're lucky, we can choose whatever we like. Dubbo's a regional town, but also the sort of surrounds is incredibly beautiful, and so my eldest daughter already is starting to really enjoy camping and asking me to go camping every time the weather's nice. So I quite enjoy being able to go out and camp with her.
I didn't pick you as a horse person, but good to know. You should talk to Inika next time you're in Canberra, because she breeds horses from our office, so she'll be interested.
Fantastic.
What do you see as next in your career? Have you got happy where you are, or are you thinking about what comes next? What challenge comes next?
I think for me, because I'm one of these people that I did a fair bit of, I suppose my journey through medicine is not a conventional one. And so I took time out and travelled around the globe and did research, and took some time out and then travelled up in the Northern Territory and did some work up there. And so it wasn't a career pathway. If you sort of go, oh, what did you jump on a fellowship program and just pump through it and do it in the shortest period of time? No, the answer is no. But for that, I'm much more fulfilled as a person, and I think a much better clinician. And so the next challenges for me, sort of wrapping up. I'm doing 2 fellowship programs, so finishing up my fellowship with ACRM and then finishing up my fellowship with the College of Medical Administrators, RACMA. I also am interested, and I've managed to get a number of quite large research grants in recent years, and so continuing to do some research there and potentially do my PhD in the next couple of years or so. I love teaching, and so we're really lucky in our region that we've got 2 end-to-end medical schools on our back doorstep, and the universities are quite keen for me to continue or start being further involved in the universities, and so we'll be looking at opportunities there. I think so for me, though, a nice spread. Oh, sorry. The thing is to make a nice spread of work that keeps me fulfilled as a clinician.
It's really nice to hear how many opportunities you can actually have in that area like Dubbo, but also getting that opportunity to work, clinically as well. So, the variety is huge. I'm going to wrap up soon, and thank you for all of your time. But one of the things I do like to ask people is, what's some of the best advice you've ever been given?
I think I've got plenty of advice that I've been given really poorly.
Well, tell us that.
I'll start with the best. The best advice that I have been given is that you can't possibly care for other people unless you can care appropriately for yourself. And so I have seen way too often in medicine burnt out doctors, and I'm not just talking about senior colleagues who are at sort of the end of their careers. I'm talking about some people 1 or 2 years into medical, into being a junior doctor, people putting a lot of pressure on themselves, doing things for other people, whether it be a mentor who's given or sort of pushing you along a particular pathway, or even putting your own overlaid expectations on yourself that ends up creating, I think, problems around anxiety or problems with sort of even imposter syndrome. And so I think for anyone going, and anyone, particularly those that are early in their career in medicine, is being able to find those things that you enjoy and continuing those. Too often we talk about sort of maintaining a work-life balance, but it is true. We need to be able to do things that we love doing. We need to be able to do those things that keep us who we are. We were people before we were doctors, and so maintaining that sense of identity. And yes, medicine is part of many doctors' identities, but being able to and doing is really important, because as soon as it's starting to be hard to do the work, you just generally, your ability to empathize with people, your ability to connect with people, it starts diminishing, and that's where I think some doctors get into a sort of downward spiral. And so the big thing for me is making sure I continue to do things that I love doing, both from a work perspective, but also from a life perspective. And I think that links back to what you were mentioning before about your networks and friends. I've got people who I know will pull me up and say, Shannon, hey, you need a break, or you need to change something because you're starting to be pessimistic or angry, frustrated, short-tempered, whatever it may be. And so I think that's the best advice I've ever been given.
And the worst?
The worst, I think, that's very common advice is everybody pushes junior doctors to jump on a program, just commit to it, and above all else, just get through and get a fellowship. Getting fellowed is very important. I'm not going to dismiss that, but if you do that and you start regretting your decisions, and because you're already a couple of years onto a program, you push through it, and you don't like that's really not beneficial for you or your patients or your family and loved ones. And so I think advice where people have tried to push you to do things because that's the conventional way of doing it, but for you to be who you are and choose your own journey, I think that's important. And then the other thing, I think that the worst advice was that when I was a junior doctor, so out of med school, I always wanted to be a rural generalist. That was sort of my number one thing. And then in my first couple of years of being a junior doctor, you obviously do your hospital-based rotations. And I got convinced through really well-intentioned people not to pursue rural generalism, because the old adage was, you'd be wasted in that area. And so I spent some time pursuing another specialty, because I had some senior colleagues who thought that was best for me, pushing me down that line, and ultimately it wasn't. That experience wasn't a bad one in terms of whether I wasted time or anything along those lines. I don't see that as a waste of time, but I certainly see that happen a lot to young doctors, is that they could get convinced by others around what they should or shouldn't do. And I think we need to be more cognizant as mentors of allowing people to choose the way in which they're going to become doctors into the future, and just support them around the edges, and not necessarily sway opinions one way or another.
I think that's a nice note to finish on. So I will thank you for your time, as always, and look forward to catching up with you soon. So thanks, Shannon.
No worries. Thanks, Peter.